Good evening, and welcome to the 13th Hong Xiu Ching lecture in the Hong Xiu Ching Speaker and Seminar Series. My name is Kanti Bajpai, and I'm Director of the Center on Asia and Globalization of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Today's lecture, as you know, will be delivered by Dr. Marie Pangestu. The lecture is titled Digital Economy and Development, an ASEAN Perspective. Before I ask Dr. Pangestu to come up to the podium and deliver her lecture, I'd like to say a few words on our speaker's very distinguished career, as well as the speaker series. Dr. Marie Pangestu is an academic by training and is currently Professor of International Economics at the Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Indonesia. She's also a visiting professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School. She holds a number of other academic appointments. She's Senior Fellow at the School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA, at Columbia University in New York, a board member of the Indonesian Bureau of Economic Research, and serves on the Board of Trustees of CSIS, that is the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta. Many of you know Dr. Pangestu best for her life in politics and public service at the highest level for a decade. She served as Indonesia's Minister of Trade from 2004 to 2011 and was Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy from 2011 to 2014. In addition to her political service, Dr. Pangestu is currently president of United in Diversity Foundation in Jakarta. She's also President Commissioner at Bank Tambangan Pensiun Nasional, or BTPN in Indonesia. And apologies for my horrible Bahasa Indonesian. Dr. Pangestu has made distinguished contributions not only to Indonesian public life, she's also contributed to international public life. She currently serves on the Leadership Council of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and is a member of the Global Future Council on Trade and Investment of the World Economic Forum. She is chairperson of the Board of Trustees of IFPRI, that is the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C., and a board member of the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. Dr. Pangestu is widely sought out as an advisor and serves in this capacity to the Global Commission on the Geopolitics of Energy Transformation of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, in Abu Dhabi, and the Geopolitical International Advisory Board of McClarty Associates in Washington, D.C. As you'll appreciate, Dr. Pangestu has an extremely busy calendar. We are therefore delighted that she's made time for us to deliver the Hong Xiu Ching Lecture for 2019. Before I give the floor to Dr. Pangestu, let me say a few words about the lecture series. The Hong Xiu Ching Lecture Series is funded by a gift from Mr. Tay Liam Wee, former CEO and Group Managing Director, Sincere Watch. The Speaker and Seminar Series is named in honor of Mr. Tay's late mother, Hong Xiu Ching. Speakers in the series have included Andrew Sheng, former chairman of the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission, SFC, Takehiko Nakao, president of the Asian Development Bank, Duvuri Subbarao, former governor of the Indian Reserve Bank, Richard Zeckhauser, professor of behavioral economics at the Harvard Kennedy School, Moses Naim, former editor of Foreign Policy magazine in the United States, and Rebecca Santamaria, currently executive director of the APEC Secretariat. As you'll note, we've had Asian and non-Asian speakers. These and other speakers have dealt with an array of topics, including trade and finance, global public goods, Asian geopolitics, and of course, ASEAN. Dr. Marie Pangestu will address us on the issue of the digital economy and development, taking an ASEAN perspective. Southeast Asia digital economy is growing and could be a major factor in its development in the years ahead. Some estimates suggest that the digital economy could raise Southeast Asia GDP by up to $1 trillion, and I'm sure we'll get an even better sense of what the numbers and figures are when Dr. Pangestu addresses us. Not surprisingly, ASEAN has taken cognizance of its great importance, and therefore today's lecture is apt and timely and fits nicely in our lecture series. Before I invite Dr. Pangestu to the stage, let me just say a few words on the evening's proceedings. After the address, I will invite Dean Danny Kuan and Lee Ka-shing, Professor of Economics, to join Dr. Pangestu on stage to conduct the Q&A session. And with that, please join me in giving Dr. Pangestu a warm welcome.
Thank you, Kanti, for the very kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Thank you for coming to listen to me this afternoon. I hope that I can share with you my thoughts on this topic. I started, when I started to prepare for this paper, I realized that I've taken a very, very wide view on this topic. But I thought that it is really going to be about sharing my journey around this topic, because digital economy and the digital disruption that's happening is around us. It's part of what we're doing, what we're living through. And what I'm going to be sharing with you is my own journey through this, and a snapshot, if you like, of the main trends and the policy implications that arise from these trends. We may not be able to go deep on many of these issues, but hopefully I'll be able to give you the main highlights. And if any of you want to pick up on any of these specific topics, we can certainly do that in the Q&A. And it is really about my own journey, because I started, when I started thinking about this or being exposed to this, I was still in government as the Minister of Creative Economy, and this was around 2011, 2012. Gojek was just born, and Gojek at the time was just an SMS application, and we already thought it was so great, yeah? And we could not have predicted where Gojek would have ended up just 5 years later. So it's just this journey that keeps on raising more questions than answers, and causing us to think more than thinking through being able to predict. You know, I don't think anybody can really make predictions on this front. And you know, you read a lot of literature on digital disruption, fourth industrial revolution, all these technologies, and it really gets quite confusing. So I try to distill it as really it's about how you convert things in the physical world to a piece of information, a piece of digital representation, a piece of data. That's the easiest way that I can understand the whole digital economy. And so it's we, as a person, we become a digital identity. The wearables we have are digital identity. The sensors in everything that we interact with have digital identity. So you're going from the physical to the virtual, whether it's production to market or transactions or the economic system, which is now going not just the traditional corporation, but really what we call the crowd-centric corporation. It gets more valuable as there are more crowd being part of the corporation. I like to use this number because it shows you what a different world we live in. I don't have it on the slide, but Gojek is now worth $9 billion, and they reached that, valued at $9 billion, and they reached that in, what, 5-6 years? Compare that to Sinarmas, which is one of our traditional palm oil companies. It took them 70 years to reach $8 billion. So this is old world, new world, right? And that's really part of the value that comes from the data. And the reason why you have so much data being connected with online connections among people, businesses, institutions, devices, and processes. They say there's like going to be 2 billion devices being connected by 2020. I don't know how, maybe that's going to be underpredicted even then. If say 5G comes into the picture, maybe it's going to be even more. It's because you have this hyperconnectivity of all the data being connected through the Internet of Things, the falling cost of mobile phone and connectivity, and the fact that data processing and data storage has just exploded in terms of cost, in terms of size, in terms of speed. And this allows you to have processes and access data to the individual and personalized level. I think we all know this because we are living this world. So this is, to me, what is the digital economy, so that we understand what is it that we are talking about. And it really allows the lowering of the search costs, allows you to have automation, coordinate between different points of data, to have automation happen, to have coordination in supply chain, and to also have innovation, which is all these platform economies that you see. These are the innovation. So this is just to start out how I see it. All of you may have a different definition of how you look at digital economy, but this is how I see it. And if we're going to talk about the digital economy, we better know how digitized is the world, how digitized is ASEAN. So 15 years ago, there were like close to 0 internet users. In just 15 years, more than almost half of the world's population, 3.8 billion, are now digitized in terms of internet penetration. How does ASEAN fare? ASEAN is about 54%, and it is much higher than Africa, obviously, and even higher than Asia Pacific. So in a way, we are doing well. And if you really want to know how digitized is ASEAN, let's have a look at a number of figures on ASEAN. And this is also another way I try to look at digital economy. There are so many reports on the digital economy and its impact. But I like to take a look at it from the development perspective. And there was this report done by the World Bank, the World Development Report in 2016, which I thought provides a really good framework for how, if you can make the internet accessible, affordable, open, and safe, if you have connectivity in developing countries, you can reduce the digital divide. But you can only enjoy the dividends of the digital divide, which is greater inclusiveness, greater efficiency, and innovation, if you have a digital development strategy. Being connected, in other words, being connected is not enough. You have to know how to be able to have the capacity to utilize that connectivity to get economic livelihood or economic gain from being connected. And that's really the whole discussion about development. How do you not just have people connected in the telecommunications digital sense, but how do they use that connectivity to better themselves, be included, be more efficient, and be more innovative? So it's about development strategy. It's about the complementary policies that need to be there for you to realize the digital dividends that is coming from the digital connectivity. So, in other words, the prerequisite to begin with, if you want to be enjoying the digital dividends from for development for your country, for ASEAN, you better be connected in the first place. So let's talk about what does it mean to be connected. To be connected, I kind of reproduced, this graph came from the WDR report, and they had developing countries in here. So I put ASEAN in there. And what is interesting about this is it shows you that mobile penetration rate has been growing at a much higher rate than all the human development indexes like electricity, water, sanitation, and so on, and internet penetration. So mobile penetration has tripled in between 2000, especially 2005 to 2017. So just in the last 12 years, tripled from 37 to 124 per 100 people for ASEAN. Yeah, but the internet penetration rate has only doubled from 27 to 54. So the story is that everybody's connected through the mobile phone, but the internet penetration has been much lower. And we'll see in a minute, the usage of the mobile phone is also not yet giving them economic benefit. And the opportunity for mobile phone, because of the cost coming down, both in terms of the hand phone cost, both in terms of the connectivity cost, has been tremendous. This is to show you two countries in ASEAN which leapfrog because of that, Myanmar and Cambodia. In the last 5 years, Myanmar went 5 times in terms of mobile telephony. Yeah? 111% growth between 2010 2010 and 2017. So just in 7 years, if you went to Myanmar in 2010, you would not be able to use your mobile phone. They really changed after 2011, after the new government came in, after democracy. Boom. Huge growth. Cambodia, the same thing. Laos is maybe the one that's struggling. Indonesia, similarly, double-digit growth in the last 7 years, from 11% to now 32% internet penetration rate, with a mobile phone penetration rate of maybe 3 times that. So the point I want you to remember, because we're going to come back to what does that mean for policy kind of question, mobile penetration rate is high, but internet penetration is much lower, because people are not being connected to the internet for various reasons related to telecom policy. So if you look at digitization of ASEAN, Singapore is the most advanced, followed by Malaysia and Brunei. And the other countries are in the middle, and Laos is at the furthest behind. Where's Laos? Yes, Laos. Where's? I can't see it from here. Anyway, Laos is the lowest. And the cost has come down. The cost of mobile connectivity has come down. So you want to be able to be accessible in terms of the mobile technology and the connectivity. You want to have it affordable, and you want to be open and safe. These are the 3 prerequisites for you to be part of the digital economy. So this is a measure of the cost, and the cost is coming down a lot, except for Brunei and the Philippines. I'm not quite sure why the Philippines is so high, but the rest of us have come down, and that's due to competition. Telecom sector is one of the most open mobile phone telecom sector. Is one of the most open in ASEAN. And this is that it shows you that only Singapore and Malaysia, apparently, this is according to the data that we could collect from Oxford Economics, I think, or is it from ITU, that Singapore and Malaysia has the higher digitization index and more secure internet servers. Okay, so this is about open and safe. We'll come back to what does open and safe connectivity mean. Obviously it has a lot of other meanings. Speed is the other thing, right? Singapore has the fastest speed, much higher than global average, but the rest of us, with Thailand and interestingly Vietnam, being much more ahead than Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The speed of the connectivity again, is important, because if you want to be able to deliver goods and services through the internet, the speed makes a lot of difference. So one of the things that is going to be in terms of telecom policy, again, is the speed of the connectivity. How about the internet use is mainly being done, it's asking the question, how much time do ASEAN people spend on the internet? And the Philippines is the highest at 10 hours and much higher than the worldwide average of 6. The rest of us, and Thailand is second. Indonesia is 8 hours, so Indonesia spends 2 more hours than average on the internet. And the Philippines, maybe because they have a lot of what do you call those? Business processing office, which they are working from the internet, maybe, or maybe they just spend a lot of time on the internet. So time spent on internet, and most of the internet connectivity is through the mobile phone. And this is the difference between developing and developed countries. In developed countries, more people are accessing through the desktop or through the laptop. In Asia, including China, it's mainly through the mobile phone. So that means mobile phone technology, such as when 5G hits, is going to make a huge difference for countries and allowing us to leapfrog in a big way. So that tells you that we are connected, mainly through mobile phone. We are not so great yet at internet penetration. But the main question is, okay, we're connected. What do we do when we are connected? I don't have the data for ASEAN, but I do have it for Indonesia. This is household survey data. So 80% is on social media. So I see a lot of all my Indonesian friends smiling, so I must be right. So search for information or news and so on. What we do for economic gain, such as online trading, financial banking, sending and receiving email, is still low 30% sending email, the rest for internet banking, online buying and all that is still around 10%. I think the story is quite similar for many of the other ASEAN countries. In other words, the room to grow for internet use and being connected through the mobile telephony for economic gain is still huge. This is kind of, it's a sad story that's what we're doing mainly, social media, but I think it's showing you the potential. This is the pattern on social media. Yes, of course, Indonesia has the biggest social media population. And social media is not just about, it can also be economically used, because a lot of Indonesians, I think the number for Indonesia is that for online sales, 60% is using social media, 40% is using the e-commerce platform. So a lot of Indonesians and in other countries use Facebook, use Instagram to do their e-commerce. So that's the connectivity story. Okay, now let's go back to this picture again. How does digital technology give us inclusion, efficiency, and innovation across businesses, people, and government, okay? And I can't give you the whole story, it would take too long. I'm just gonna give you some highlights. But, and then we're gonna talk about the risks. So here's the benefits part of it. And a lot of it is snippets from data, as well as, I guess I can tell you some stories behind some of the data. So this is the most quoted report on e-commerce in ASEAN, which is the Google Temasek Southeast Asia e-commerce development, which is telling you that in the next 10 years, the size of the internet economy is going to go from 32 billion to 240 billion. Sorry, it's a bit small to see. And a lot of that is going to be coming from ride-hailing, as well as online media, online travel, and e-commerce. This is a typical pattern for the development of internet economy in most countries when they start. And the size of the internet economy as a percentage of GDP is the highest for Vietnam. So I think Vietnam is the one to watch. Vietnam seems to be ahead of even the main 6 ASEAN countries, except for Singapore and Malaysia. Vietnam, 4% of GDP is coming from internet. The rest of us is about 3%. The lowest is at 1.6% for the Philippines. And we are all gonna, especially Indonesia, double-digit growth in terms of the internet economy as well as the e-commerce market, which is valued at about $600 billion. So this is the size, and this is an ASEAN story. We always talk about ASEAN as being the 7th largest economy in the world if we put all their GDP together. So similarly, they're going to be maybe number 2 or number 3 in terms of the size of the e-commerce market. If this is why the ASEAN integration in e-commerce is important, if you could have an ASEAN e-commerce market. We'll come back to a little bit of that story too. This is just again showing it's still small. Retail as e-commerce as part of retail is still small, but there's a room to grow. If you think that we are going to be growing where China is going to go, are we going to be reaching 20%? So in China, 20% of their retail trade is already through e-commerce. ASEAN is only at around 2%. This is an estimate. Nobody really knows how to estimate these numbers because we don't have accurate numbers on e-commerce, but this is an estimate. And even the US is much lower than China. Yeah? So a lot of people think that ASEAN is about 5 years or 8 years behind China. So but things can change. It's not a linear path. But if we're going to go in the direction of China, then there's still a lot of room to grow for e-commerce. And the other potential in ASEAN, so innovation and these digital technologies, they usually grow when they service an unmet market, an unserviced market, which is in the case of ASEAN, financial inclusion. Because 50% of ASEAN still do not have access to banking services. They don't have adults that don't have bank account in ASEAN, right? And this has led to the growth, the next growth of e-commerce is normally the fintech, and all the platforms end up doing payments, lending, and so on anyway. So that's the natural progression. They enter into the fintech, and they are servicing those who don't have bank accounts. And then the banks are under threat, and the banks have to digitize, and governments also have to respond. So one of the responses, I think quite innovative response of the Indonesian government, was to allow branchless banking. So it allows banks to use agents who are normally the ones selling the prepaid cards in villages, in remote areas, to receive payment on behalf of the bank. Right? And I'm from a bank which is focusing on the bottom pyramid, on the micro lending. We have, in the last 3 years, employed 300,000 agents for branchless banking. And we've been able to expand our business without opening banks, without having to open a bank branch. So it's really lowering the cost of financial inclusion. This is just an example of opportunity. And this is why fintech in ASEAN in the last 3 years especially have really, really grown. Whether it's peer-to-peer lending, whether it's payments, whether it's lending, but a lot of them are still linked to the banking system. This is very different from China, because in China, they did not serve the micro enterprises. The banks just serve the large enterprises. In Asia, it's a bit, in our part of the world, in Southeast Asia, it's a little bit different because the banks were already entering into the micro enterprises. So it's more of a collaborative model. Other examples of benefits, we do surveys on Grab and Gojek drivers, and we found that their income has increased, and they have income higher than the minimum wage. So it's benefiting the drivers. We also have data on benefiting those who take it, the riders, how much time they save, and how much they're being helped in terms of convenience and time and so on. And the vendors that are on these platforms are also having a huge benefits, the SME merchants. Lots of numbers on that. I don't have time. Here's a nice. This is a study recently done by CSIS for Grab to show you all the benefits that come from the merchants, from the riders, from the consumers. So that's the benefit. That's part of the digital dividend. That's the benefit from development, that you are including people who did not have gainful employment or decent jobs before. You are helping SME merchants. I mean, the whole concept of Alibaba was to help SMEs and so on. So this is being replayed in Asia. And it started out with ride sharing, okay? So typically it starts out with the ride sharing. I give you another example of how digital helps creation of jobs. It's the delivery of labor services through digital technology. There are many, many examples. The business processing offices that are part of the Philippine export of services is one example. In Indonesia, we do animation services, we do design services. If you watch Garfield next time, half of it is being produced in Batam, okay? Even though the IP is Hollywood, Garfield, but half of it is being produced in Batam. And even BPO services of the Philippines, they are being threatened now by bots, right? Because call centers, routine work, and repetitive work are being replaced by robots. So they actually have to go to the next level of giving services which are more design, more discretion, more creative, and so on. And that's where Indonesia is now entering into the space. My example, you can look up in YouTube if you want to know the whole story. This is a case study we actually did. It's a kampung, a village near Central Java in Magelang, where there's this village that started out doing outsourcing for web design on a platform from Australia called 99 Design. And it started with somebody who was looking after the warnet, the warung internet, yeah, where people can go and access the internet. So in his spare time, he found that you could actually enter competition with design and win money, yeah, $200, $300, $400. Then he taught the rest of the villagers to use the internet, to use programs to design logos, websites, and so on. They don't speak English, that's overcome with Google Translate. They don't have bank accounts, so they use PayPal. And they self-taught, they're usually just high school graduates. They self-taught themselves to design logo on YouTube, on internet. And probably they didn't use paid program, probably they used some, some borrowed program for the design. But their income went up, the whole village what became better off, the crime rate went down because all the young men stay up at night working on logo designs rather than getting into mischief. You know, all sides, we did a full-blown case study on this. If you really want to watch it, it's very interesting. Look up Kampung Designer on the YouTube. So that's just some stories about the benefit. How about the inclusiveness story on government and public sector? Lots of stories here. E-government, many examples of e-government in different ASEAN countries. In Indonesia, a lot of our e-government stories come from city level. We had in Jakarta, we had this Q. Was it Q? Yeah, it's called Q. It's created by some young group of millennials to check on issues related to Jakarta. So if the light on your street went out, you can submit your request to CLU, and then within 2 or 3 days, it will be fixed. So that kind of thing happened. And of course, in terms of elections, in 2014, volunteers throughout Indonesia, they had this Kawal Pemilu. What's Kawal? What is Kawal? Safeguard. Let's guard the elections, that we have watchers, people who are watching in each election post and submitting the result as they are being counted. And we have a disruption in our political system also, political party. I think one of the candidates is a graduate from LKY. Rian, is it Rian? Yeah, Rian. So what they did was they posted, if you want to be a member of parliament and you want to join our party to become member of parliament, apply online. Here's the requirement. Recruited online, and then when you are selected, you pass the screening, you get interviewed by a panel of experts. And the whole panel is put on YouTube. So everybody knows who you are and what the interviewers asked you, how did you answer. Everything is transparent. And they plan to have, using digital technology, to be reporting from Parliament, and so on. So this is just some examples. That's inclusiveness. Efficiency. How about efficiency? For sure, making everything faster, easier, should lead you to greater efficiency, and therefore greater productivity, and therefore greater growth. That's kind of the economic argument. We have some correlations between internet penetration and GNP per capita, but this is just correlation. Is greater internet penetration causing you to have higher GNP per capita? That needs empirical work, but at least the correlation is there. Some other numbers, as an economist, I've been trying to find the correlation between digital technology and growth and productivity. Haven't really been able to find it, but let me just share with you what at least people are doing, what the numbers tell you. ICT capital versus non-ICT capital as a contribution to growth. You know, those of you who are economists know that to grow you need capital, and to have growth you need capital, labor, and capital is divided between ICT capital and non-ICT capital. So the red color is the ICT capital. The blue color is the non-ICT capital. And the yellow is the total factor productivity. So in some cases, there is a contribution from the increase in ICT capital to TFP productivity. But again, more empirical work is needed on that. Finally, I did find, we just recently, in 2018, there were a number of papers done by PwC, by some academics using CGE modeling. What they do is they put a productivity, a technology shock on each sector. And then they impute, and the technology shock comes from other studies. You know, in automotive, if you adopted robotization and AI, this is the potential impact. So they did it for every sector, and then they shock you, they put a technology shock. The technology shock produces a productivity increase, which then leads to growth. And on average, for the world, it should lead to 1% increase in growth. And obviously, a lot depends on the technology shock. If you have a big technology shock, like I don't know what it is, but a huge innovation in something that makes the producing or something become totally different, then it would be a much bigger shock. But on average, it's 1%. So one of our researchers applied this for Indonesia, and the result for Indonesia is that Indonesia would grow at 0.55% higher on average every year if we did adopt the digitization in every sector, okay? So this is the potential. That means we can grow close to 6%, in other words, yeah? So for me, this was a very powerful result, telling you that, okay, how do I get to that 0.5%? How do I have digitization across sectors, across firms, and across workers? Because that's what's going to need to be done. How do you have the adoption rate? And there are the studies also look at, okay, we also did a number of other studies. So the key is, okay, you know that if you did a technology shock, you'd have an increase in productivity. But how do you know that the firms or the sectors in your country are going to adopt that technology? And it turns out that whether or not a country or a sector or a company adopts faster or not depends on a couple of things. Can they have access to the ICT capital to begin with, right? Are there tariffs? Are there hindrances? Are there local content requirements that reduce the type of technological equipment that you can use, for instance? Cost. The cost of it can be high. Is there a role for government to give tax incentive for you to adopt new technology? Competition. If you are facing competition, you are more likely to try to adopt new technology. Digital capacity. This comes back to, okay, we are connected, you know the technology is there, but you don't have the capacity, human-wise, to be able to utilize and adopt the technology, whether it's the SMEs or the workers in your country. So the opportunity is there, but the challenge is also there. So if you look at firm level, Indonesia is, we don't have data on the level of usage of firms on robotics and AI and so on. We have done a survey, CSIS did a survey, and we found that 56% of corporations in Indonesia are already using robotics and automation. But at the very simple level of using email and websites, Indonesia is still one of the lowest, and again, Vietnam stands out as being the highest in the use of their firms using internet and email and website. This is just a measure of firms adopting digital technology or being digitized. And in the World Development Report, they also show you that firms in Vietnam which use web and internet have a higher level of productivity. So we try to replicate the study for Indonesia using World Bank Enterprise Survey data. And we came up with a similar result that firms are more productive and more likely to export. So again, export and competition is also another variable that makes companies digitize. Okay, so that's the efficiency story. That's the benefit from development, right? Growth and efficiency and higher growth will be achieved. Innovation. The last part of the story of the benefit is innovation, okay? The innovation comes from the platform economies that are not unique to ASEAN, but was something that happened 10 years ago, is it? When did Facebook happen? 2009, right? 15 years ago. So Facebook and Uber, sorry, most like, Uber is 2009. Oh, you're Facebook. I forgot. My friend is from Facebook. But I think I'm talking more about Uber. Uber was 2009, I think, yeah. So the ride-sharing platform was this notion of platform economy where economists call it a two-sided market because it gains more value the more you have two sides of the market. More Uber drivers, more consumers will use Uber. More consumers, more Uber riders. And the value of the platform comes from the scale and the data that is built up on that platform. And these platforms then earn money from the data. I think this is a very well-known story, and you monetize it from the data. This is the innovation that comes from the platform economy. And the pattern of innovation comes through this process where the disruption usually comes from the media is the first to get disrupted, then travel, then retail. And the ride sharing, I forgot to put ride sharing there. Ride sharing then is the one that has been able to create a lot of data. And from that ride sharing data, they enter into e-commerce. They enter into everything else, including payment. The golden goose is the payment. So if somebody asked the Minister of Communications and Information in my country, he said, what's going to be the biggest bank in 5 years? Because, digitization of banking and so on and so forth. And his answer was, it's not going to be a bank, it's going to be Alibaba. Because Alibaba and these e-commerce platforms are going to have such huge numbers giving the financial services. They may actually buy banks, but take over banks. So everything becomes merged. This is part of the innovation that happens. And we see this happening, and we, of course, have ASEAN-based unicorns, which is Gojek and Grab. Okay, and they are ride-sharing platforms. This is the story of Gojek and Grab. And in this story, you will see how the valuation has increased just in 5 years, and how they are Indonesian founders and Malaysian founders, but I think they are actually based in Singapore. And that's because of the financial sector regulations and so on and so forth. So, but both are already ASEAN-based, and one is valued at 9 billion apparently, and the other one is valued at 11 billion. They have now entered into, Grab is already in 6 other ASEAN countries. Gojek is now in another 2 ASEAN countries, and Grab and Gojek are competing with each other. Another issue with these digital economy and platform economies is the winner takes all model. So if you end up in the world with Google, Amazon, YouTube, Facebook, are we going to end up in our part of the world with Gojek and Grab, or Gojek or Grab? Is one going to grab the other, or is one going to be merged with the other? They are competing with each other in the same market. Before that, they were competing in different market and developing their own strategies. Now they are actually competing with each other, and each one of them have different big investors behind them, from China, as well as from the Googles, the Microsofts, all the major players are here, showing you that ASEAN is a very fast-growing digital economy market that can only continue to grow. If you looked at all my numbers previously, there's still a lot of gap in terms of the growth and how much we are behind China, how much some of the ASEAN countries need to catch up. That is, yes, we are still behind, but that is the potential for growth that's going to be exponential. I would say, give it 3 years, give it 5 years. It's going to happen very, very rapidly. And Grab, as we know, took over Uber. And this is part of the competition issue. So another issue with these innovative platform models is it's a competition issue, it's a taxation issue, and ownership issue. So Grab, just let's take Grab as an example. When they took over Uber in Singapore, the Competition Policy Authority of Singapore did an investigation, and I think they were fined was it 9 million Singapore dollars, because they have the majority of the market, and they had raised the price by $15 or something along those lines. So you can have a winner-takes-all outcome with these kind of innovative companies, which raises competition issues. For taxation in Indonesia, we are having a big debate whether we should be taxing the e-commerce merchants, the small, medium-sized enterprises who are merchants in these platforms. Because this idea came up before elections, it was killed. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to come back again. The other thing is, should you be taxing Google for the activities they do in Indonesia or not? This is another big debate we're having. Do you tax Google at the point of production? Because they claim they are based in Singapore. I produce everything in Singapore. I'm only selling in Indonesia. So if you don't tax an automotive company producing in another country and exporting to another country, you don't tax the automotive except for sales tax. Why should you tax income tax also to me? Yeah, Google. This is from a Google perspective. Indonesian government is saying, no, you are earning most of your revenue, sales revenue, in Indonesia. So you should be paying taxes in Indonesia. Big debate, and still going on. Some compromises coming up, but taxation is another issue. Obviously, Google is facing the same issue in Europe, in different states in America, and so on. So that's another dimension that is important. This is to show you how Indonesia has progressed just in 5 years. So as I said to you, 5 years ago when I was minister, Gojek was just an SMS application. Now Gojek is our biggest unicorn, and we have another few unicorns, and they're all in those fields. Tokopedia is e-commerce, Traveloka is travel, Bukalapak is also in e-commerce, and these are the telecommunications companies. A lot of this is in media. So this is the space that you see in Indonesia. Indonesia is probably the biggest one, just because we are the biggest market, but it's also growing in the other ASEAN countries. I think the one to watch is Vietnam, and probably Myanmar and Cambodia are at a different level. They're at the beginning, but again, that would be another area to be looking at. So the e-commerce fight in ASEAN, it's between Shopee, Lazada, Alibaba, and Bukalapak. This is Indonesian e-commerce, but Shopee is in Southeast Asia, Lazada is also in Southeast Asia, and they are competing in each of the ASEAN markets. There are e-commerce platforms, maybe not as big as Tokopedia, but some are quite big. So who is behind Shopee? It's Tencent. Who is behind Lazada? It's Alibaba. There's a difference between the pattern of Chinese investment coming into this region compared to Amazon. Amazon comes in as Amazon, whereas the Alibabas, the Tencents, they come in by acquiring or working together with existing platforms. So let's see what's going to be the outcome. But it shows you that because the major players, the major investors like Sequoia, like SoftBank and all that, they're also in this space. It shows you that ASEAN is growing, and ASEAN is going to be the next big growth area. Okay, so let's close with the risks before we talk about policies. I'm really conscious of time here. What are the risks? Predictably, if you have data, then the government can have your data, and if the government is not accountable, they can also use the data to control and do things that we would not wish the government to be involved with what we're doing. But probably the biggest scary thing for many of us as people, governments, and companies is, how do you deal with the inequality? That there are going to be job losses with automation, with digitization. How do you deal with the job losses and the skill changes that need to happen? And finally, of course, we just talk about that, scale without competition. So the concentration and the winner-takes-all model that happens can really, really be very scary if we don't deal with it. Let me just focus on inequality, because that's kind of the real scary part of the whole story for many of us, yeah, and the one that doesn't really have good answers. Inequality is increasing. If you look at all the global trends, the share of labor out of national income is falling, and most of the work loss is being lost in the middle skills. It's the repetitive skills, it's the routine, I shouldn't say skills, tasks. You know, people say you must make a distinction between jobs and tasks. So clerical jobs are not the ones that are lost, but clerical jobs that are repetitive and routine tasks will be gone. But clerical work which still requires discretion or judgment will still stay. So the focus now is on tasks, not on jobs. But the middle skill level jobs are the ones that are gone or have stagnant in wages. And this is exactly what happened in the US, and that's the reason people say Trump won. And in developing countries, it's similar. It's the middle level skills and the lower level skills. So the challenge is, how do you respond to technology and build up skills? I think we all know this. I'm sure all of you should be having this conversation in your companies, in the universities, and everywhere. We don't know the answer, but just some numbers to not scare you, but to inform you that at least one study by Oxford Economics is saying that 10% of ASEAN 6 workforce will be displaced by automation in the next 5 years, right? So this is and Indonesia is one of the ones that will be most affected. And a lot of it is in the agriculture sector because of the unskilled nature of the agriculture workers. And technological displacement will be mostly in agriculture, affecting 13% of the workforce or 10 million workers. Jobs lost, agriculture, but jobs gained in other sectors. So jobs, tasks, this is kind of the challenge for us. And okay, I'm already running out of time, so let me just close with, I'm not going to be able to go through the policy issues in great detail, so maybe we can tease it out. Let me just highlight what are the policy issues in general, and just highlight to you a few things that are happening globally. Yeah, we can see that there's the benefit, and then there are the risks. And the benefits don't come about if you don't have connectivity, right? So, and the whole value of the digital economy happens because of data flows. So data flows is a central part of the story of digitization. You have to have freedom of data flows, but at the same time, you have to balance it with managing the tensions, such as security issue, privacy issue, disruptions, competition, and the fact that a lot of times the regulatory agency is behind the curve on any particular technological development. You can take ride-sharing as an example, where we've had demonstrations by taxi drivers, by taxis against the disruptors, and so on. And lack of the understanding of certain issues by the policymaker is that, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, I just control it. Because I don't know what's going to happen. It's better for me to just control. I just want to play safe, right? And normally, like in the case of Indonesia, we tried to ban Gojek when we had demonstrations by the traditional ojek. And guess who complained? The consumers. Consumers complained very loudly, and the president had to reverse the Minister of Transportation's temporary ban. He said, I'm going to have a temporary ban on Gojek until I figure out what I should do with Gojek, right? This is like 2-3 years ago. And then the consumers protested. The president went back, said, okay, minister, you have to just let Gojek go again while we figure out what we need to do. And then subsequently, you know, policies on safety, security, and drivers came out after that, but Gojek was still allowed to go. So that's some of the issues that we face. And governments have a really difficult task of how do I manage transition, both for the old sectors, traditional sectors, and for the workers who are going to lose their jobs, right? So do we need to do, yes, we do need to do reskilling, retraining, but what skills, what training, who pays for it? And should I give incentives to companies to do this? Or should government get involved? Should governments give a social protection measures to manage the transition? These are, I think, what governments are facing. Businesses need to innovate and be agile. And it is about at the end of the day, maybe because I'm an economist, I still come to the conclusion that if we want to have innovation and efficiency, remember, adoption of technology and businesses being innovative, being efficient, needs, at the end of the day, continued importance of openness, whether it's goods, so that the ICT goods can come in, services that support digital economy, whether it's computer-related services, design services, R&D services, logistics and delivery services, and investment. You want investment to come in. Are you going to limit the amount of investment that comes in, right? And labor. And those are the 4 parts of freedom of trade and movement that we have in the ASEAN Economic Community vision. But now we have to talk about data. Right? And when we talk about data, it's different from goods. It is about systems be able to talk to each other, and trust. A lot of trust in the data issue, and also trust, governance, and privacy issues, which are the difference with goods. So I think I've run out of time. So without going to the rest of my slides, you can look at them. Maybe just one slide, because for those of you who don't know this data, just like when we do work on trade, we look at openness of trade, and we look at tariffs on goods, we look at investment restrictions in services. In digital economy, ECP is a European-based think tank. They have been measuring digital restrictiveness. So if you want data flows to be free, basically this is what you have to address. So it's a similar kind of approach like what you would do in trade in goods. And China is the most restrictive. So China allows 100% foreign ownership, but they do other things to restrict the players to play in China. The other, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand are also relatively restrictive. A lot of that is localization of server and so on and so forth. So. In closing, the issues that are on the table now are all related to data flow, removing restrictiveness in data flow, but still allowing countries to have security and privacy. And also privacy, that data governance, data flow with trust, data free flow with trust. This is the G20 agenda of Japan, DFFT, data governance with trust. What does that mean? Nobody really knows, but it means basically if I don't trust your privacy or security systems, I'm not going to allow the data flow. So there's going to be a huge discussion on what does trust mean in your system, in your country. And data localization, data service requirements will be increasingly questioned because it is part of the CPTPP. It is actually part of your ASEAN e-commerce agreement, but you still have an exception under public policy, right? So what does high security data that you want to keep in your country mean? You have to start defining it. This is some of the debates that we will be having. And e-commerce agreement under the WTO is in place. We can talk about what the issues are in there. I mentioned 2 already, but these are the issues that we will face globally. Yeah? And therefore, what you do nationally and in ASEAN, you need to take into account those issues.
Thank you, Mary, for a truly spectacular tour de force of the digital economy issues that in ASEAN we confront. I've been corralled into helping moderate the Q&A. So if you want to, so my job really is to be just the guardian at the gate. Those who want to ask questions, if you could make your way to the microphone so that, we can, all of us here, not just all of us here in this room, hear your question, but also our friends on social media that we're live streaming on will also then be able to hear you. While people are sort of getting up to the microphones, maybe, Mary, I could kick things off by perhaps being a little bit of a devil's advocate, if I may, just to sort of get the discussion going. Let me try and suggest that the digital economy is actually not all it's cracked up to be. Okay? And why do I say this? The big successes that we think about, that you describe, that we celebrate in ASEAN as the unicorns, the darlings of the digital economy, Gojek, Grab. It is true that a lot of their value added is in manipulating and organizing data. It is true that they're moving to all kinds of different services. But the bottom line of it is that they're moving people from one place to another. The business that they're in, the bottom line that they're in, is not about producing digital content that consumers can consume the same way that media companies, movies, Hollywood produces. What Gojek and Grab, for all the wonderful, cool, trendy things that they are, they're about moving physical molecules. They're not about creating new content in the form of zeros and ones and digital data. They're about moving people, physical molecules, food, physical molecules from one place to another. They're actually very much part of the non-digital economy. They are successful because of the success and the thriving growth in the non-digital economy. Do you agree with this idea that we have well overplayed, overestimated, overblown the success of the digital economy in the darlings of the ASEAN digital unicorn space?
Yes and no. That's a good answer, right? I think no, in the sense that they are still moving physical things, so it's still the old economy, if you like, but they're doing it in a more efficient way. So you still have the benefits to the workers and to the consumers. So you can actually calculate that, right? In terms of the inclusiveness and in terms of the efficiency as well as the innovation. So there's a value still to it, even though there's no digital, if you like, content, right? But somebody meant so the yes part of it is where I'm coming at. So someone described to me just a few days ago the difference between digitization and digitalization. Do you know what the difference is? I didn't know that until I heard this person say it. So he said, digitization is what you were saying. So it's using the digitization to make something that already is a transaction, like ordering a taxi. Now you're ordering an Uber, but you're digitizing it, so you're making it more efficient because you have these platforms. But digitalization is the real digital content, which is a driverless car. So that's digitalization. And I believe that's coming, right? So the digitalization, we are still at the stage where it's digitizing everything, which reduces search and information costs. It makes coordination and information much more, making you able to really be efficient and innovative. But you haven't actually gone to the digital content in 0-1. But it will come with AI and all that, I think.
Excellent. There's this distinction that in some of the discussions here, much is made of B2B, business to business, or business to consumer. But of course, in certain parts of the internet economy space, there's a lot more attention paid to the O2O line of work, which is online to offline, which is the space that Alibaba plays in, another huge player, which is a space that Gojek and Grab and others. Lots to discuss, but I see that people are already lining up to the microphone, so let's begin. Sir, you first.
Good evening, Prof. Marie. Thank you for your lecture. I'm Edmund from NTU. My question would be related to trust and the issue of the bill being passed in Singapore, protection from online falsehoods and manipulation. So I'd like to know what are your views, and do you see such bills being passed in countries like Indonesia and other and beyond? That's my first question. The second question will be, you mentioned very quickly about taxation. So how do you see that unfolding in Indonesia and ASEAN with regards to the digital economy? Thank you.
Mary, we can, it's up to you. We can collect a couple of questions, then you can take them, or you can answer this now. Up to you. Which would you prefer? Let's take a few. So coming over on this side, please, again, identify yourself and then ask your question.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm Vinod Pandey. I'm a MPA student at LKY School of Public Policy. So I have actually two questions. First thing is that how do you see the digital economy in the rural market, especially in countries like Myanmar and Laos? Second thing, how do you see the correlation between digital literacy, especially again in the rural market? Because digital literacy not only in terms of benefits of digital economy, but also about the threats, especially the security and all. So how do you see this?
So there are 4 questions from the two of them. So why don't we? Okay, let me. You want to take some more? Okay. Mary's taking notes. She's going to take some more. So James, go ahead.
We've got more questions.
Thanks, James Crabtree from the Lee Kuan Yew School. To bend down a little bit. I wanted to ask you a question about how these changes will affect patterns of globalization. The model of globalization that allowed East Asia to become rich was predominantly driven by labor-intensive exports. Automation reduces the value of labor in manufacturing, and the trends that you're talking about make digital flows more important, both as a component of services, but also than manufactured goods. So in addition to the positive things you've talked about, do these changes bring into question the ability of lower middle income countries in this part of the world to use labor-intensive manufacturing as a development springboard?
Yourself, please, go ahead.
Okay. Easy to remember. My name is Lim Swee King. Okay. As an Indonesian. I work on policies and future technologies. I admire Dean Kwa pointed out one very important thing. The constant change for civilization is to expand integrations. The driver for economy is transportation communications. Therefore, that is what I share, that biotech cannot drive economy. And that is why you see the policy change since then. So, technology has integrated us into one global village. The integration among men has come to maturity. So we face diminishing return. Therefore, we have to expand integrations with Mother Nature. And that is how you can have clean energy and clean water. I wish to share with Professor Mary later on, after this discussion, because I have seen the waterway in Jakarta. There is a solution in Singapore that can filter the water without getting choked. From here, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lim. Mary, over to you. Really interesting set of issues that have been raised.
Very wide range. Sure. Okay, the trust and the, I think you are referring to like a hoax, anti-hoax laws, anti-fake news laws, I think. Did I catch that question correctly? Yes. So I understand Singapore just passed anti-hoax law. Yeah, Indonesia also has had lots of discussions on this, and we did try to pass something, but I'm not sure how it came out. But there were a few, what do you call it? They were able to trace who were the source of the hoax, and there were a few people who were caught and given sanction. But my own view on this is that you can have this kind of laws, but it's going to be so difficult to actually control. The moment you try to put filters and controls that are being manned by a government or by a security agency, I think, it's kind of the versus of it is the freedom of information, the freedom of expression, which is always the counterbalance. So I think it's going to be very difficult to draw that line. I'm more inclined to have the responsibility be taken by the platforms themselves and the wisdom of the crowd. There's this terminology called crowd wisdom, so that you as the crowd, that because I think they are also trying to target WhatsApp group discussions. And by the way, in our election analysis, WhatsApp group was an important, I think in India, the same thing here. It has been an important tool. But there has to be the crowd wisdom in itself to be able to police it. At the end of the day, it will emerge. And that comes from education, comes from all kinds of measures. Yeah? And the platforms themselves, they need to be, to have their own way of detecting if something is really bad that they should take down immediately, right? The case of the New Zealand, the shooting in New Zealand, it took how many minutes? 20 minutes or something? Was Facebook? Was it Facebook or, yeah, it was Facebook.
Yeah, it was live streamed on Facebook,
they took it down, right? Something like that should never happen, right? And if something like that happens, then the platform needs to, there should be some sanction against the platform. So, but no matter how good your algorithm is, it might be very difficult to actually detect something. So you might have to do a Wikipedia kind of thing where, you know, people need to be also vigilant and report if something like that happens. Things like that. I'm more, that's my own view. Because I just don't think that if you put an agency or a government in charge of figuring out whether something is a hoax or something is fake, you are going to have a lot of problems, I think, in terms of the cost would be on the freedom of expression and democracy. Taxation, I think it seems there's this big discussion going on right now, and it is part of the discussion of in the WTO. It's between customs duties and taxes. So taxation on sales is probably very legitimate. Even in the US, different states have different sales tax. So if you buy on the e-commerce platform, you pay a different sales tax, depending on which state you are going to buy it in, right? So with ASEAN, I think sales tax would be the way to go. But the moment you enter into customs duties on electronic transmission, which is at the moment under moratorium in the WTO since '95, there are those who want this to be, the moratorium to be lifted, so that you can impose customs duties on electronically transmitted transactions. And that's going to be very difficult to implement. So, and then you have a question, in ASEAN, you have zero duty between ASEAN countries. Are you going to have zero duty on the electronic transmissions? Because I think that should be the way to go. If we want to have one e-commerce market in ASEAN, then we should have zero also, right? So I think that's where some of the discussions will be going. On the taxation of corporations, now that's a different issue, because the issue is about the different corporate tax rates. Singapore has the lowest corporate tax rate. That's why Google is having their office here, and they want to pay their income taxes here, of course, right?
Well, there might be other reasons why they're here.
Yes, of course. But it's the same issue that Google faces in Europe. Why did they locate in, why did they move from, I think, Holland to Ireland, you know? They're looking for the lowest tax rate. This has never been a solved issue in ASEAN. You know, it's kind of like, should we compete with each other to lower our tax rates or not? It's not an ASEAN, it should be ASEAN finance ministers' issue. But I don't think that's in the works, you know, to say have a uniform tax rate. But how do you have a more equitable tax payment if the company is domiciled in the lowest corporate tax rate location, but it's doing business, its main businesses and revenues are being earned elsewhere? It's a question, because that's going to be the big issue. Digital economy in global market, potential for Myanmar. I think it's going to be growing just like it has grown in Indonesia and Philippines and Vietnam. Myanmar and Cambodia are looking very much like they're going to be leapfrogging. And if you think about Myanmar, they don't really have a banking sector. Yeah, so are they going to leap immediately to just bypass, you know, nobody needs to have credit cards or debit cards. They just go directly to the fintech, for instance. So there's going to be a lot of potential for leapfrogging in ways that are going to be very innovative. How about digital literacy and the threats from security? I think the most important thing that countries need to have in their digital strategy is really on the connectivity, the physical telecommunications connectivity, and the ability for the internet to be used in that connectivity. And that's a telecom policy. Okay, so it's spectrum, backbone, and so on and so forth. That's still a big homework. And the second homework is the digital literacy. Once you're connected, how do you have the capacity to get value from that platform? And that requires you to be digitally literate, you know, your population, your businesses, and so on. And that's probably the number one homework for countries like Myanmar and Cambodia and even Indonesia. You know, we are a large part of our population still needs to be addressing the digital literacy before you even talk about the upskilling and the reskilling, which is more of a Singapore, Malaysia problem, right? So different stages of ASEAN ASEAN countries are at different stages of development in terms of digital literacy, and there needs to be a continuum of effort on that. And also, again, I think your question is absolutely correct. The security, and it's not just a security issue, but maybe it's an education issue, because this whole notion of hoax and fake news. You know, we watched it just recently in the recent elections, this debate between quick count and real count. So the opposition was saying, no, they didn't win yet. That was just a quick count, not the real count. and then they posted a lot of information on the social media, and a lot of people thought that that's true. Yeah. But there was just no understanding of that. So information does need to be that. It's not just a security issue, but a kind of a wisdom issue. James' question, yes, absolutely. I think this is the biggest worry because we are already seeing automation and robotics being used in labor-intensive industries, and they are replacing labor. But the question is, we are doing some interviews on footwear companies and garment companies. And I'll just share you two of my insights. We still need to do more research to find out what is the real pattern that's coming out. What they're saying is that we are replacing the repetitive work and the routine work. But we are shifting them, that we have to reduce the number of labor, but we retrain them to do more the systems management, right? That's one response. And in the footwear case, they were saying that we did this because the labor laws in Indonesia are very, very stringent on retrenchment and minimum wage, and then we face strikes. So that's another reason why we switched to robots, because the robots don't strike and they can work 24 hours, right? And we have to compete with Vietnam and China, who are much more efficient and much more productive. So that's another answer. The third answer I would give you is, this is interesting because she's the person that I interviewed on this is the largest garment exporter in Indonesia. And so when we asked her, so what does digitization mean in your case? Are you going to end up, reducing the amount of labor that you're going to have? And she said, no, I am using automation, I am using some robotics, but what I'm doing now is I'm having 3 shifts instead of 1 shift. So it's the augmentation, in other words. So not all labor is replaced, but the existing labor is made more productive by the technology. Yeah? And she said to me another interesting thing, that to me, Industry 4.0 is not about the robotization or the automation. It's about the end-to-end, the supply chain, so that I can be linked. This is the openness of data is very important, so that I can have my protocol in my digital system talk to the protocol of my buyer, so that I know exactly when they're running out of the red sweater, and I'm also linked to the procurement part of my global value chain. So red sweater running out, immediately there's a message to the procurement, order red material, red thread, whatever, and then immediately it goes into the order. That's what I'm dreaming of. Yeah. So while you are going to be, probably I'm answering your question in a long-winded way, but I think my two takeaways is that the adoption rate is still slow, but it's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So we still have a little bit of time in terms of the labor-intensive sector. But in 3 to 5 years, it's going to be much reduced. But it's going to be a different type of labor use. And the value from the digital economy for the labor-intensive sectors are still going to be there if they transform and digitize their whole value chain as a response, right? And the labor can be retrained and shifted to do other things that are still in that value chain. What was the last question?
About the holistic nature of the development of the digital economy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, it's a holistic nature of the development of the digital economy, and the digital economy can help. To me, I do a lot of work on sustainable development, as you would have noticed from what Kanti was reading. And I can see that technology, digital technology, can really help give answers to the sustainable development question, whether it's the smart grid for energy, whether it's a smart transportation system that can make sure you can have less traffic jam and so on. And smart energy is a lot to do with renewable, how you can have the off-grid and the on-grid and so on and so forth. And I think the possibility of drones and satellite images can really help you to monitor where environmental destruction is going on. And data, I think data is increasingly going to be very important for many things, whether it's food policy, environmental policy, and it can also depoliticize the debate. Having accurate data can depoliticize a lot of debates. I give you a concrete example. As trade minister, I always had fights with the agriculture minister on rice, because they're all against the import of rice. Whereas the Minister of Trade has to make sure there's enough rice so that the price is stable. So we always dispute on the rice production data, right? It's an estimate after all. But lots of debate, continued debate, and when you're late importing rice, the price goes up, right? So the people suffer. This debate was put to rest with satellite technology, drone technology, and still on the field technology. It was actually one of the systems developed by IFPRI. That's why I know about it. And it settled the debate last year. And the president has agreed, this is the one data that we are going to use from now on. And it has a high level of accuracy so that there can be no more debate. And you can depoliticize decision making.
Very fascinating. Kanti is giving me signals. I was actually going to say that we're going to have to call this. People are having other commitments and I see them leaving. But I just wanted to say, Mary, you've brought to us so many interesting issues, so many fascinating challenges, conceptually, analytically, the new data, the new mechanisms that you're telling us about. And one of the wonderful things about this is how the impact on the well-being of ASEAN is significant. It's not just some academic discussion. I think, I can sit here and listen to you for hours with all the insights that you're bringing, all the fresh data that you've got. But as Kanti and I have just engaged in this frenetic conversation, I'm going to have to call this evening to a close. I want to thank the audience for all your attention and all your enthusiasm. But most of all, I would like you to join me in thanking Mary for a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.